All right, so the COP26, which is in its 26th edition of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, is underway in Glasgow. It is the biggest and arguably the most important climate summit in recent times. It's also being dubbed as the last hope to keep the 2015 target of limiting global warming to under 1.5 degrees before the end of this century. And the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in fact, reiterated that if the Glasgow summit were to fail in containing the threat of climate change, then this would effectively mean the world would not meet the target of limiting the temperature of 1.5 degree rise before the end of this century.
The countries most responsible for historic and present-day emissions are not yet doing their fair share of the work. If we are going to prevent COP26 from being a failure, then that must change. And I must be clear that if Glasgow fails, then the whole thing fails. The Paris Agreement will have crumpled at the first reckoning.
Now, Johnson, whose government has outlined plans to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, has welcomed the moves to reduce pollution from countries including Saudi Arabia, Russia and the United States. But when asked about the chances of success at the summit, he gave it only about 6 out of 10, saying that this was a bit of a touch-and-go situation for the world. Meanwhile, amidst the global energy shortage, President Biden also defended his policy, saying that it was not inconsistent for him, on one hand, to push for energy-producing nations to increase the output of fossil fuels, and on the other hand, also urge countries to transition to renewable sources of energy. He reiterated that such changes do not happen overnight.
Well, on the surface, it seems like an irony, but the truth of the matter is, you've all known, everyone knows, that the idea we're going to be able to move to renewable energy overnight and not have, from this moment on, not use oil or not use gas or not use hydrogen is just not rational.
The COP26 President Alok Sharma also opened the second week of the summit on Sunday and called on the countries to work together in his opening remarks.
The rapidly changing climate is sounding an alarm to the world to step up on adaptation, to address loss and damage, and to act now to keep 1.5 alive. And we know that this COP26, is our last best hope to keep 1.5 in reach.
All right, so that is what it is being dubbed as COP26, the last best chance to ensure that the temperature does not rise more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And to give us more perspective, we're joined in by WION's Siddhant Simal, is joining us live on this broadcast from Rome. Now, good morning to you, Siddhant. We saw the world leaders at the G20 summit a couple of days back that concluded yesterday. The leaders had extensive talks on the issue of climate change, and now the focus is shifted to Glasgow, where the leaders again will be focusing on how to limit the global temperature rise. What can be expected of the COP20 summit meetings today?
Well, yes, Mohammed, the summit begins today at around 5:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. The leaders will be gathering for the leaders' session, which will continue for 2 days. And of course, we know the Glasgow COP26 meet continues till a few more days, till 12th of November. But talking about today, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is the host of the meeting, will be making the opening statement and talking about first UK's commitments to climate change. He will be talking about that, how there's just 1 minute to the midnight, that is a crisis situation essentially, and also talk about focus areas like phasing out coal, about transition to electric vehicles, and of course more afforestation across the world. But it's easier said than done, given the fact that it's a very contentious issue, because at the end of the day, the need for energy is something that many developing countries need, cheap sources of energy. And we know that coal is one of the cheapest sources of energy. For transition, we need technology, we need money, and there has been commitment by the developed world of $100 billion commitment when it comes to financing these technologies. But they have been missing. there have been various reasons, whether it's the economic crisis, whether it is the COVID crisis that has impacted the economy. So essentially, the developing countries have been asking that developed world needs to do more, while the developed world has been saying that developing economies like India and China need to phase out coal, which is difficult for them. Indian Prime Minister, of course, is present there. He reached earlier today, and he will be talking about what India has been doing when it comes to renewables, India's commitments to renewable energy, and also initiatives like CDRI and, of course, the International Solar Alliance. In fact, tomorrow, the Indian Prime Minister will be launching an event on the sidelines, an initiative of resilient infrastructure for island states. That will be the major outcome of the Indian Prime Minister's Glasgow visit. But today he will be participating at the summit, and also he will be delivering India's national statement that's expected to happen 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
Absolutely indeed. Now, it's very interesting how Boris Johnson has in fact dubbed this Glasgow COP26 summit. He said that if Glasgow were to fail, then the world will not be able to meet the target of keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Now, the fact of the matter, Siddhant, is it is these richer, more developed nations who've been a part of this problem, but now they're not willing to open up their purse strings to help these poorer developing nations to adapt to greener and cleaner technologies. Can we expect some kind of an agreement to come out of Glasgow on this specific issue?
Well, yes, that is why developing countries like India have been calling for differentiated responsibilities. You cannot measure all the countries with the same length, with the same scale, and you need to understand there are historical responsibilities of developed countries. They starting the industrial revolution and essentially contributing more, and now they expect countries like India and China and other countries to stop use of coal and other such resources. But largely the commitments are commitments made by the developed countries in the past. In fact, the $100 billion commitment for climate financing, it's a decade-old commitment, more than in fact decade-old commitment. 2009 it was committed by the developed world when it comes to $100 billion of commitment, but it hasn't been ever fulfilled. Partly one of the reasons being the economic slump we have seen over past few years, the impact of COVID crisis on the economies. But essentially, as UK Prime Minister has been saying, it will be make or break. Yes, it will be make or break, but big question is also on whether there will be a consensus formation or the world will continue to stand divided on this issue of climate change, whose impacts can be seen everywhere, whether it's here in Italy or whether it's back home in India.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Siddhant Sibal, for joining us and getting us all those updates. We'll of course come back to you as more details emerge on the COP26 summit. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.